Vatican, and those are mainly Italian cardinals and Italian bishops.
On Easter Sunday, he also called for peace in Gaza, and as well as warning against contempt against migrants. So very much in the forefront of the headlines, dividing the country, dividing the world today.
Right. And Pope Francis has not been shy about these appeals in the slightest.
And he has done so, get out of his car, as a man who I think most people had thought was perhaps his last miracle. And it
he never hesitated. He was a pope who also was the one to have, the war in Ukraine happened during the full-scale invasion of the war in Ukraine and the Holy Land. And then he was also the pope to have led through the pandemic. There's so much that has happened through his pontificate that it's easy to almost not keep track at this point. But yes, these issues that Pope Francis has repeatedly, and even throughout his hospitalization, he every Sunday would issue a series of appeals in his Angelus address, even if he didn't pronounce it, but he still wanted it published in order to call for peace in the world. So he never was, he always was active from this point of view, even when he was very, very ill.
Deborah Luboff, I appreciate your being with me this morning. As I'm sure you were awoken, we're all awoken with this news of the passing of Pope Francis at the age of 88. Thank you. Let's turn now to Christopher White, who is the Vatican correspondent for the National Catholic Reporter newspaper. Christopher, are you hearing anything more from the Vatican about the circumstances around the death of the Pope this morning? Was he awake? Did he die in his sleep? Anything else that you can share?
Those details have yet to emerge at this point. I think everyone is, on one hand, in a state of shock. This is a pope that, after a very serious hospitalization, returned home to the Vatican for a recovery. And we heard his doctor saying they expected, 90% or 100% recovery. But those of us who were in St. Peter's Square yesterday watching the Pope, we saw a very sick man. I mean, he on one hand was in his element, being close to the people, but you could tell that he was very much pained. That there was at one point I watched one of his assistants almost massaging his back. He at times appeared disoriented. I think it's fair to say he was having a very tough day yesterday, but determined to press on, and it seems to have been ultimately have been too much for him.
I can imagine that's the case, even though there are some reports that he still was speaking with a stronger voice than we heard. Talk about his last few appearances that we've seen. We know that he did not celebrate or participate or preside over Easter Mass, but he made that appearance, was out and about in St. Peter's Square for a little shy of an hour, about 50 minutes, where he did surprise the faithful there by appearing in his Pope-mobile riding through St. Peter's Square. Talk about how his appearances have been and his health had appeared in the last few appearances.
His last few appearances were vintage Francis. This was a pope who 12 years ago came in as a maverick, doing it his own way. And we saw him go out as a maverick. He made these surprise visits almost every other day of the past 2 weeks. One day he was meeting with King Charles and Queen Camilla. The next day he was in St. Peter's Basilica passing out candies to small children. This was a pope who was determined to just be on the go, to be close to people. And what we saw in these appearances is a weakened pope. I mean, there was the signature smile that we had all become so familiar with these past 12 years. But there was also just the recognition that this was a very tired man. He had great difficulty moving his arms. His voice was quite weakened and raspy. And so this was obviously a pope that we saw, diminishing in front of our eyes, at the same time being true and authentic to who he is, a man of the people and a pastor at heart.
Given his frail state, he was able to meet briefly at his hotel with Vice President J.D. Vance on his way to the Basilica. The encounter lasted just a few minutes, and the two were able to exchange Easter greetings. And then Pope Francis was even able to give the Vice President 3 chocolate Easter eggs to share with his young children. So tell us more about that visit, given how weak the Pope appeared.
Well, this was a closely watched meeting. I mean, it's fair to say that Pope Francis is arguably, has been one of the world's, if not the most vocal champion of migrants. And sitting across from him yesterday was Vice President J.D. Vance, who I think is a very fierce anti-immigrant campaigner. So we, on one hand, many of us thought there might be some underlying tensions at this meeting. What we saw was a encounter, almost, a son and a grandfather. It was quite short. We heard the Vice President tell the Pope that he prays for him every day. And then the Pope, gave the Vice President 3 chocolate Easter eggs for his 3 children that are traveling with him. And then he gave the Vice President a necktie. I think it's fair to say there weren't any serious policy discussions taking place in that conversation. It was, I'd say it's fair to couch it as a son and a grandfather type meeting. Very, very cordial.
Certainly touching as the images we're seeing now, touching as well of his appearance. Christopher White, the Vatican correspondent for the National Catholic Reporter newspaper. I appreciate your time early this morning. Let's turn back to Claudio Lavanga, who is now at the Vatican. And I'm sure, Claudio, as it is morning there and here in the United States, people are waking up to this. The faithful are, as we could see, are beginning to gather.
Well, that's right, Francis. Well, this is Easter Monday, so a lot of people were meant to be here anyway. A lot of pilgrims were coming here in the first place. But right now, they're all learning about it slowly. And I could see that there was a group of faithful just right next to me that was praying for Pope Francis. I don't think everybody still grasps what has happened. A lot of people are just here and smiling and taking selfies. And I don't think they understand or know that the Pope has died yet. It is making the Italian news, of course, right now, but it is still 10:30 in the morning, and a lot of people are not watching the news at this time. This is a day when people are out, especially in Italy, to celebrate Easter Monday. It is a national holiday. People are out for picnics and barbecues, so it is slowly trickling in. But certainly, the people who are here, the faithful who gather here for Easter Monday, are slowly getting to terms with what has happened, and probably they can't believe that they happen to be here in St. Peter's Square on the day, just literally a few hours after Pope Francis has died, Francis.
And certainly when it comes to the people finding this out, they can't help but think how profound and symbolic this is, and the timing of his death and the meaning of his death after Easter Sunday and after those appearances.
Absolutely. Easter, the Holy Week, is the holiest, the most important week on the Catholic calendar. Easter, of course, is one of the most important days, and to the point that Pope Francis really wanted to take part in the celebrations. He wasn't scheduled to appear here in St. Peter's Square yesterday for Easter, but then, of course, he made that surprise appearance on that central balcony of St. Peter's Basilica right there. Literally 24 hours ago, I was here reporting on it, and we were all reporting on how, he looked better. He didn't look well. He was still swollen. He could barely move. He could barely speak. But certainly he looked better than when he left the hospital more than a month ago, especially because he wasn't wearing those oxygen tubes in his nose that were helping him with the intake of oxygen. We took that as a sign that he was on his way to recovery. Another sign that we really thought was that he was recovering well was that for the first time since he left hospital more than a month ago, he he got on that Pope mobile just 24 hours ago to tour St. Peter's Square and the surrounding area where I'm standing now to greet the faithful. And they were all ecstatic to see him because they haven't seen him, of course, in person for a while, for almost 2 months. And they were so happy to see him. And now they will be so distressed to know that he's gone. Francis.
And certainly next, the centuries-old chain of events, the morning of his passing, plans for a funeral, and, of course, the election of a new Pope. Claudio, thank you. And that concludes this NBC special report. I'm Francis Rivera. Keep it right here on NBC and NBC News Now throughout the day as we continue the coverage of the death of Pope Francis.